The reading is from 2 Corinthians chapter 2 verses 1 to 11, and I'm reading from the New International Version. So I made up my mind that I would not make another painful visit to you. This is Paul speaking to the church at Corinth. For if I grieve you, who is left to make me glad but you whom I have grieved? I wrote as I did, so that when I came I would not be distressed by those who should have made me rejoice. I had confidence in all of you, that you would all share my joy. For I wrote to you out of great distress and anguish of heart, and with many tears, not to grieve you, but to let you know the depth of my love for you. If anyone has called grief, he has not so much grieved me as he has grieved all of you to some extent, not to put it too severely. The punishment inflicted on him by the majority is sufficient. Now instead, you ought to forgive and comfort him, so that he will not be overwhelmed by excessive sorrow. I urge you, therefore, to reaffirm your love for him. Another reason I wrote you was to see if you would stand the test and be obedient in everything. Anyone you forgive, I also forgive. And what I have forgiven, if there was anything to forgive, I have forgiven in the sight of Christ for your sake, in order that Satan might not outwit us, for we are not unaware of his schemes.
I feel like we've already been through a journey with some sort of emotion and I don't really know where to start, but thank you. Beautiful, beautiful beginning. And we've been looking at the 2 Corinthians and readings from there over the past couple of weeks, and we'll continue with that today, really focusing on forgiveness. And I don't know, does anyone else find it sitting in an interesting place that we look at a word like forgiveness on Anzac Day? And I, just reflecting on your experience there on those shores of Gallipoli and obviously all the things that we've learned over the years of going through Anzac Day processes, I would suggest that this country has really demonstrated how a community can healthily handle forgiveness with all its ups and downs, tears, difficulties, attempts to have another go at life in a remarkable way. And really we could sit with a reflection of that with Paul's reading and recognise what it truly looks like over decades to live with the complex reality of what forgiveness really means. Too often in the churches, they just need to forgive. It's not simple, is it? It's not simple at all. I have to admit, because I spend a lot of time with folk who have been a part of serious injustice, so either serious family violence, victims of sexual assault, sometimes often actually those that have been the perpetrators of such things. I've been shaped by forgiveness confronts me. It's confronting. And a couple of things I'm really grateful for. One of them is small things in your life that happen that you can, it's often, I can remember being young and having a grudge with someone for a long time because, they said this one thing and it irritated me. That stuff doesn't really bother me anymore. It's really nice. I can say sorry for when I'm been a pain in the bum, which is pretty regularly, let's face it. I'm human. And but also, unless it's my husband who's saying that he stir fries better than mine, because that's wrong. You got to make a stand, don't you? Mine's better. I'm also cautious not to throw around the ease of forgiveness. And I recognise there is a massive cost to those who have been wronged, and also for those dealing with what it means to have wronged someone else. The big stuff. We had a little chat about that this morning, Jill. The big stuff in life, it's really hard to confront. I think the first time I was really confronted with this, I hadn't been a Christian for that long, and one of the young women who was living with us at the time, she had been in and out of foster care because her father used to lock her in a room in the house under the stairs or somewhere creepy like that and refuse her food, and a whole bunch of other abuses, or make her sit at the table when everyone was eating except her. Just horrible as a little child, like just messes with my head. And she became a Christian through the relationship with family and my family and other people. And I could just remember her just in tears one night saying, "How I can't forgive him. How can I do that?" Knowing her past, how could I suggest that that's what she needed to do in that moment? And, she's 30 or something now. It's a very different way of looking at that stuff that she has, but it's life. That's her life of wrestling with that complex issue. And another chick in a even worse, I would suggest worse abusive situation from her father, and stayed with us, and as an adult became part of our team and helping at camps and stuff. And I was sharing a tent with her one night, and she'd wake up in the middle of the night punching things because of the residue of the abuse that she was living with. And I can tell you, she's a strong girl. That's a scary thing to wake up to, but that she's again working out her faith and this word forgiveness that sometimes as a church we can throw around very flippantly and not recognise what it's like to actually have to wrestle with that on a tangible basis. On the other side of that, I've been part of a board for a Christian organisation dealing with a person in high leadership who conducted themselves inappropriately with someone that was vulnerable, and dealing with that and the retribution when someone refuses to take responsibility and rather claims to be the victim. That's a mess. And then influencing others within the Christian body, causing others to be very confused, claiming not really following Jesus when forgiveness isn't present. It gets messy, doesn't it? Who's having a good old time being a human? It's crazy. It's a mess. And really, I think as a church, often we're a little bit afraid to discuss, really taking responsibility for your actions. Forgiveness is important. But what does also confession, repentance and justice really look like? I've got lads that are in prison at the moment who they've done the wrong thing. They're in prison, but now they are really a victim of a system that is never going to help them to get their lives back on track. That every time I see them, I'm like shocked by how degraded they've become, and then become again, and they're really ruined individuals because of, in some cases, a minor crime or a silly crime of a youth. How do we confront this as a church? And here we have the wonderful Apostle Paul giving it his best shot in difficult situations. And this church, as all of the early churches, was so different in terms of who's there comparatively to our, Australian church. We all look pretty civil, don't we? And everyone's good mates. Well, in Paul's church, they would have been meeting in someone's home firstly, probably small, maybe about the size of this group right now. And the dynamic is, you have people that are slaves and the folks that own them. Okay? People that have had their lifetime, maybe come to faith and maybe their behaviours change, but I'm sitting next to someone who I have owned, and who knows how I've treated them. And then the victim that has had to live with that in the same church. Mess. Men and women. The power dynamic today we've been recognising over our media, the power dynamic in ancient times, vastly different. Really an oppressive environment for women, particularly those in a lower socioeconomic area. We have Jews and Greeks. These people are enemies. They're enemies. They've got things, all sorts of history where they can make accusations of wrongs. And there are power dynamics. And the power dynamics is another thing we don't often talk about in churches, I would suggest. And in all letters, as in all of these letters that Paul has written, Paul and others, there is a particular circumstance this advice is addressing. And we actually don't know what it is. But Paul seems to allude to a situation where a person has repented and Paul has accepted their forgiveness, and he pronounces this forgiveness and that the whole community must follow suit and embrace this man again. So Ched Myers suggests there's two things that we can be sure of. The reason for this forgiveness is this: so this individual will not be overwhelmed by excessive sorrow. We see that in 2 verse 7, and also to prevent, sorry, my writing's too small on that slide, isn't it? Oh, it's a bit better there. So that to prevent from exploiting an environment of resentment in the community. Disharmony among a community is a very disruptive force. Very disruptive. So can we apply this advice to all situations? Can we apply this advice? We must forgive this person so he's not too overcome by grief. We must forgive this person so then we're not disrupting the whole community. Do we need to apply this advice to all situations where there have been wronged? You think? It's tricky, isn't it? It's tricky. Had two young women have moved into our centre over the past couple of weeks. The first one I've known for many years, and she's settling in delightfully. And when she was 14, I thought I was going to pull my hair out when I was trying to support her. She was a right little madam, and she's still a madam, but she's a lot more mature. She's wonderful. I really love her. And another girl has moved in. They go to the same school. Lo and behold, there's some sort of background Barney that's quite serious in their life. So our first young lass disappears for the weekend. She's 16. I'm like, freaking come home. I'm calling the police. Let us know you're okay. And the other one, is pretending like everything's fine, and she's, the perfect person and has... anyway, messy. Without knowing the situation, how do you approach those two young women and suggest harmony needs to happen? Who knows? One's from a very poor background. The other one's, more middle class but bit of family violence. Do we ask one to leave? Which one do you do? It's tricky. Sorted out though, but yeah, there was a real situation and it needed to be addressed. And now they're friends, so that took a few days though. So I want us to have a chat about forgiveness and the realities of it. And I've got a couple of questions, 4 questions. So what have you learnt about forgiveness over the years? Is the way of forgiveness the same as just letting go? Is it possible to make a journey of forgiveness but not feel reconciled? Does saying sorry restore a relationship? It makes it easier. Thanks, Jill. It's a start. Yeah. Oh, sorry. We've all got something to say. It's good.
Sometimes seeing the other person's view on things as well.
Wonderful. Thank you, Pam. Listening to the other. Wonderful. Really good. Anyone else want to respond to any of these questions? Yeah. That's excellent, Jill. Yeah, it is. Yeah. You still live, and we know the body physically responds to trauma. Physically. So perhaps the forgetting might not be as simple when situations are really difficult. How about for others? What have we learned from Anzac Day about forgiveness? Yeah, we don't forget. Yeah, that's true. Yes. Yes. And I also see, like you suggested, Pam, people are willing to listen to the hurts of the past and take that on. And that's been modelled very well from all spheres of our community, from leadership to local initiatives. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. So are you saying, Alan, are you suggesting that there is no justice retribution if you forgive someone? Is there still required to be a process of justice for a hurt? Yeah. There is. Well, there is. Because I would suggest, like the situation when in the board that I experienced where there was misconduct, that person needed to be stepped down. So that there was a line that needs to be drawn sometimes, but that doesn't mean you can't still forgive. Yeah. Yeah. Yes, that's right. And it's similar in a logical way that if you're not looking after your pet well and you've dropped that responsibility, there is a physical problem and the pet suffers from that because, there is a consequence to our actions, isn't there? And we see that in a range of situations, but we, as people in a community, we need to model that in a respectful way, in a wise way. And I would suggest, Alan, it would be careful we're not acting in anger when we're working out what the response is, which is very hard, isn't it? It is very hard. So I have with me, I use the, I'm actually a trainer with it. I haven't done it in years though. Has anyone heard of Real Justice Restorative Practice? Yeah, teachers, everyone at school knows this. Sorry to bring school into the church, my goodness, how terrible. But that real justice was developed by a fella. Actually, I think that his son there might have been some sort of family tragedy which caused him to work out that someone who has done something wrong is willing to live with the consequences as long as the process is fair. And then he discovered from a victim's point of view a similar acceptance. If the process is fair, and how we talked about listening over here, people feel listened to, able to contribute to why their suffering has been so difficult. The outcome of what the next steps could be brings a healing process, which I think is what is so important about forgiveness. Because it needs to be something where there is healing. And sometimes it takes a lot of time, like with my couple of girlfriends, long time. So I have these cards and I'd love to. I was supposed to put them on the chairs. I'm a bit of a nugget. I forgot about that. Do you mind handing those out to folks? Thanks, Glenda. The ones that Glenda will give you, you can keep or grab a couple of, and they're a bit of a copy off of the original Real Justice ones, but they're still good. So effectively, there are questions on there for you to consider, and I do this when I've done the wrong thing, what it's like and what really happened and who has been impacted, and most importantly, what needs to happen to put things right. Now, and if you look at this theologically, it is what happened, confession, yeah? Who has been impacted, which is part of confession, and then it is repentance. What needs to change to make things better? And there's some questions on the other side or on the other page that helps you process something when you've been the victim. And it's really helpful if you're with a couple of mates or family members and there's been a Barney to ask these questions. So what happened, Cliff? What were you thinking of at the time? What did you think about? What have you thought about since? And often you see, I've really realised I've stuffed up. Who's been affected by what you did? And what do you think you need to do to make things right now? Do you see how it helps, these questions help someone who's might have done the wrong thing journey through a process of really a helpful, kind way of identifying how to confess, how to consider another person and listen, and how to put some changes in place. And similarly, for the victim, what did you think when you realised what had happened? What impacts has this incident had on you and others? What has been the hardest thing for you? What do you think needs to happen to make things right? I suggest if you want to take more of these, I'll leave them up here. But I cannot, having used this process many times, like our teachers will have, I cannot tell you how many times I'm shocked at what is forgiven and what responsibility is taken on when situations are at such a terrible level. And the real justice one is actually done in situations where people have died. They run big community forums using these questions, and different stakeholders share the impact, and the victims get to share, and even people who have perpetrated also share their journey of confession, repentance, and it has the power to heal. And I believe strongly that a similar process has occurred through Anzac Day. It's wonderful to see those shores in Turkey, how Australians are received every year. You know, it was an invasion, and yet they beautifully received, beautifully. So for those, I think it's really important for those of us that do carry hurt, from extreme life events. And for those of us that haven't really experienced being a victim at that level, to recognise that for some, this journey will be a lifetime. And for some, they may not ever really be able to acknowledge that they've completed the task of forgiveness. And as Christians, can you love someone anyway, if that's their experience? Because we need to remember the Spirit of God lives in all of us and is between every created being. And before God shared his Spirit with humanity, from the cross, Jesus cried, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing." I don't think any of us will fully understand how far that reaches and where that inhabits. And it is that forgiving God, that Spirit that lives in you and the person you're annoyed with. Yeah? And that Spirit, and it's that God who we are all made in the image of. You look around, you walk down the street in Mornington, you have a little Barney with someone on the road that cuts you off. That person is made in the image of God. It's remarkable that we get to hang out with all these images of God, isn't it, every day? and work out how to live with them. because they're not always easy. And I suggest that if you cannot process the pain of forgiveness like my friends I mentioned earlier, it's okay. God has got this. God's got it. Can you work out how to rest in Him as He is the executor of your forgiveness from within you? Okay? We're going to have communion now, which is kind of funny because the whole thing happened originally at a table, of course, with Judas, who participated in that. Their brother, our brother. Yeah? And the irony of dealing with conflict as Paul did, and then asking folk to eat together, slave and owner, male, woman, Greek and Jew. How disarming and how confronting to sit at the table with this fella who's been publicly forgiven and being told to forgive him when you're not sure if you actually can. It's tough. And that, my friends, is church. Let's share this. Let's take this cup up. I'm sure we're all aware now. We all are germy, so we need these little cups. And the lids aren't fastened on, so we'll just take them from the bottom. And these cards are up here if you want to take some more. Let's grab ourselves a little bite to eat and a drop of wine to drink at 9:30.